All right, guys, Wes here. Welcome back to the channel. And as you guys know, God of War Ragnarok was one of the biggest games of 2022. And as of now, it's the biggest first-party Sony release of all time. According to official reports, Ragnarok sold over 5 million copies in its first week and over 11 million copies by the time it hit its 10th week on the market. While God of War Ragnarok was criticized by some for being overly long and much slower paced than the previous games in the franchise, it did receive critical acclaim and is one of the best scoring games in Sony's lineup. And of course, it remains as one of the main PS5 system seller titles to this day, which in fact, despite being a cross-generation game, Ragnarok sold over 80% of its copies on the PlayStation 5, which is extremely impressive. But despite this game being a runaway success, updates on the future of God of War Ragnarok have been incredibly quiet, and there is still no official word on a PC port or an official expansion. However, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to talk about, because there are a few hints floating around the internet that suggest that we could be getting one of these things in the relatively near future. So in today's video, we're going to go over everything we know about the future of God of War Ragnarok, including when you can expect to see an official trailer for the PC port and a possible DLC announcement, or is the God of War franchise pretty much dead until God of War 6? The first thing that I want to discuss is the status of the long-awaited Ragnarok PC port, because I think all of us really want to know if it's in the works, but unfortunately Sony hasn't said anything about it just yet. The sales for Sony's first-party PlayStation games on the PC have been incredibly well, despite some outlets and Twitter users trying to claim otherwise. Every single new PlayStation Studios game that hits Steam managed to sit in the top 20 of the sales charts for at least a week when they come out, and some previous releases like Spider-Man Remastered, Horizon Zero Dawn, and of course God of War 2018 continue to sell thousands upon thousands of copies. In fact, it was recently reported that PlayStation's PC division generated over $2.5 billion in revenue during the most recent fiscal year, so don't listen to the people claiming PlayStation is dead on PC, because it just isn't. Not to mention, PlayStation is allegedly releasing their own client on PC. Granted, that's just a rumor at this point, but I've got a feeling it will happen. Now, I did see some people saying the Ratchet & Clank flopped on PC because it had some of the lowest concurrent players out of all of the PlayStation PC ports, but you have to remember that concurrent players do not equal copies sold, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart didn't sell gangbusters on the PS5 either, so you kind of have to manage your expectations. Obviously, Ratchet & Clank isn't going to sell as many copies as Spider-Man or God of War, and expecting that game to do it is just kind of dumb. And that's really not even mentioning the fact that God of War 2018 sold well over 3 million copies on Steam, so it's all but confirmed that God of War Ragnarok will indeed be coming to PC. The only question now is just when is it going to happen? Personally, I'm expecting there to be some kind of Ragnarok PC announcement within the next 3, maybe 5 months, maybe 6 months at most, and it could possibly be revealed at the rumored PlayStation showcase that's supposed to happen sometime this month or next month. Following the extremely underwhelming PlayStation presentation in May, a lot of people were really hoping for some kind of follow-up so PlayStation could tell us more about their first-party content that they have in their pipeline, but according to various insiders, some who have correctly leaked previous PlayStation showcases, there's going to be another event at some point in August or possibly September where we're going to likely hear about stuff other than Spider-Man 2, such as whatever Naughty Dog is working on, a potential sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, and possibly even some news on God of War. While it's obviously way too early to expect an announcement for the God of War spin-off game or another DLC, I think this would be a perfect time to announce that God of War Ragnarok is indeed coming to PC, or at the very least we get some kind of DLC. For those of you who are still not believers of the Ragnarok DLC theory, I'd like to point out a couple things. First of all, Horizon Forbidden West got a paid expansion roughly a year after its release, despite not selling nearly as well as Ragnarok did, so nothing really is out of the realm of possibility. Ragnarok released in late 2022, so I don't think it's really too late for the game to get some kind of paid expansion within the next few months, maybe within the next half year. It's also worth noting that Elden Ring is over a year and a half old at this point, and we're still waiting on that game's first expansion to be released. In today's day and age, expansions are coming out later and later for successful games, and that's mainly due to how long it takes to develop AAA projects nowadays. But with how successful Ragnarok was, I think Sony would have to be insane not to greenlight some kind of paid expansion. There have also been multiple cast members of Ragnarok making vague statements in interviews about how we haven't seen the last of their characters despite being the last game set in the Norse timeline, which once again points towards some kind of paid DLC. I've also been hearing some rumors online about how Sony is planning on a director's cut or something along the lines for Ragnarok, which would actually make a lot of sense because some of the team members have stated in interviews that there were at least a couple of subplots that had to be cut from the final build due to how they impacted the pace of the overall story. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the expansion added those plot lines back to the game, or perhaps instead of a paid expansion, we're getting a director's cut of God of War Ragnarok. That would also make a lot of sense for the PC version, because then Sony could release both versions at the same time instead of staggering the PC release even further away than they already have. But I kind of want to hear from you guys. Do you think that Sony Sony would do a paid expansion or a director's cut for Ragnarok, because at this point I think a lot of it's going to be one or the other. Sony has been getting a ton of mileage out of director's cuts for their first party games like Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding, so if they have some unused content that they want to get out of Ragnarok but they don't think it's enough to justify a paid expansion, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they throw it in some kind of director's cut and then release both of them on PC and PS5. That being said, if the rumors of a Ragnarok director's cut are wrong and Sony is just planning on doing another expansion, I think that puts the PC version back a bit further in the timeline. I'm expecting the PC version to contain all of the content released up to that point, which means it will likely have to have all of the DLC built in, which would also mean that Sony will likely want to wait at least a few months before releasing it, so that way PlayStation players don't feel ripped off. Also, it'll drive more sales to the PS5 console. But then again, if there actually isn't any paid DLC in the works, I'm expecting the PC port to come out sometime maybe midway next year, or possibly at the 2-year anniversary of the game's initial launch on the PS4 and PS5. Perhaps it will come out early next year if Sony wants to build it up a bit more, but I don't think PC players will be waiting that long to play Ragnarok. After all, Sony wouldn't have ported the 2018 game to the PC if they weren't planning on continuing the series over there. So basically, I think there are 3 possible timelines when it comes to Ragnarok's future. The first timeline is the game gets a paid expansion at some point in the next year or so, and then the PC version releases about 3 to 6 months after that. That'll contain both of the base game content as well as DLC included. The second timeline is that Ragnarok gets a director's cut on both the PC and PS5. That includes some new story content, but not as much as you would expect from a paid expansion. And then the third timeline, which I'm getting more and more likely, is that there isn't any DLC for Ragnarok, and instead the PC version will release with the same content as the PlayStation 5 version. The later that we get in the year, and the longer that we go without any official word from Sony, the less likely I think a paid expansion for this game is, but I'm still holding out hope that we'll get some kind of new content for this game, because obviously the fan base wouldn't be interested in it, and the game's cast definitely seems to be under the impression that something new is coming before we leave it behind with God of War 6. Now there's also a possible fourth timeline that rather than us getting an expansion for God of War Ragnarok or a director's cut, they decide to throw a Hail Mary and give us a spin-off game with Atreus as the lead. I've talked about this a ton of times on my channel, and I do think it's very possible that we get that, especially how much Ragnarok kind of feels like it's leading into something else. We know that Atreus and Kratos went their separate ways, and just the ending of Ragnarok kind of made everyone to believe that something else is about to happen with the Norse timeline. Now, whether that means God of War Ragnarok expansion or a spin-off game with Atreus as the lead, or possibly God of War 6 will tie into Ragnarok, we don't really know, but there's just a ton of possibilities. We still don't really know the mystery behind the mask and the rift. There's obviously the tension between Atreus and Sindri, where the ending of Ragnarok kind of made it seem like Sindri was going to retaliate in some way, which that still could be a possibility. So a story expansion or a spin-off game or just something in the Norse timeline would be a perfect way to kind of close that up so we can have kind of another fresh start with God of War 6. I've seen some theories that God of War 6 is going to be a completely new setting, but this time it's going to be the multiverse, where Kratos goes in and out of different portals, and it takes him to, let's say, the Egyptian mythology, Celtic in one area, and just kind of being the peacekeeper throughout the entire multiverse. But there's also the possibility that God of War 6 is just a giant Egyptian mythology game, where it's a big open world game like Assassin's Creed Origins. But what do you guys think? Do you think there's going to be some kind of paid expansion for God of War Ragnarok, or do you think Sony will go the director's cut route, or maybe do you think neither of those things are going to happen and Sony is truly done with this era of God of War? I absolutely love the Norse God of War storyline, so I'm really hoping we get something new in the near future, but I do try to be realistic with you guys, and frankly, I think if the PlayStation showcase happens by the end of August, maybe sometime in September, and we don't hear anything about a Ragnarok expansion, it's probably not going to happen, and this is pretty much it. Sony really needs to bring their big guns when it comes to first-party content at the rumored showcase, and since Ragnarok is their biggest release ever, the announcement of a paid expansion would bring the house down. But that also means that if they don't confirm it there, it's probably not going to happen ever. But let me know what you guys think is going to happen with this game. Are we going to get it on PC, and how long are we going to have to wait for it on PC? Drop a like on this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel with your notifications turned on. I'm also giving a PlayStation 5 away at 130,000 subscribers, so if you guys would like to enter, check the pinned comment for all of those details. Make sure you subscribe to the channel with your notifications on, and until next time, this has been Wes, and I will talk to you guys again soon.